Now, here's George Roberts.
I'm with Matt Osterberg, Pike County Commissioner Chair. Matt, great to have you with us.
Thank you.
We're going to talk a little bit about what's happening here in Pike County with economic development, but let's tell everybody a little bit about you first so they have an idea who you are. I understand that you moved up here in 1974 from Staten Island.
I did. So my parents had a summer house in Twin Lakes that my dad had built in the 60s. 1974, me and my mother and my younger brother moved here permanently from Staten Island. I finished high school here. My brother went all high school through here. You know, it was always the area I always wanted to live in, even as a young child.
What did you do, I mean, that young, what did you do around here? I mean, there was not a lot here in 74.
Well, you know, I lived in Shahola. That's where Sagamore Estates is. You know, there was hunting, there was fishing, there was, you know, just outdoor things. And just, I had already, because I was a summer resident for so many years, I already knew a lot of people here. Because I spent every summer for 8 years from June to September. My mother would, I went to a Catholic school. As soon as school let out, my mother would pack us all up in the car. I have an older brother also who would come earlier with us also, and two older sisters, and we'd all just come up here and spend the whole summer in the mountains while my dad worked down the city.
So really like that, being outdoors and
yeah, and just you know, the thing is that always intrigued me was I always loved the little town of Milford, even as a little kid.
And that's where you live now, right?
And I live right in Milford Borough, and right across the street from the administration building.
So you went to Penn State.
I did.
Right, and graduated what, with a history degree? Is
1983, I graduated with a history degrry. Had the visions of going to law school, but you know, by the time I got out of college, I was just like, I just need to come back here. And by that point, I'd already had a job with Luhr's Hardware. You know, and the Luhr's family, very special to me. The dad saw me and gave me a job early on, right out of high school. And I would work there and go back and forth to college. I'd work in the summer, then I'd come back, then I'd go to school, then I'd come back. And then 1983 came and they offered me a position that was very nice, and it gave me the opportunity to make sure that I always resided in the borough.
What did you like about working in a hardware store? What was so interesting about
customer service?
Really?
You know, and you know, that always, when people ask me about the job I have now, this job right now as county commissioner, when you're an elected official, pretty much customer service.
Right,
you know, it's making sure the constituents are taken care of. In the hardware store, making sure I solve the problems. How do I fix that drippy faucet? How do I, you know, how do I install that water heater?
I was going to say, what are some of the craziest questions you ever got in the hardware store?
Well, all of those things and more. You know, how do you get rid of all the mice in my house? You know, how come the pipes froze in my house? Well, you turned the heat off. You know, but it was just, and then also just connect them with the community. You know, even till today, when I'm out and about, people will remember who I was and that I worked at the hardware store. You know, I mean, I worked there for 35 years.
Wow.
Yeah, and you know, the interesting thing is I never worked more than 1.5 miles from my house. So every day I would be able to go home, see my kids, and I went on the Milford Borough Council in 1987. A month before my daughter was born. I was 29 years old, and Merritt Quinn at that time was the mayor. There were some vacancies. He asked me to be on the borough council, and prior to that, I used to attend all the meetings. I would be me and my wife would be the only ones in the audience. Merritt calls me one day and says, "You need to be on the borough council."
You're already at the meetings.
I'm at the meeting, and that's what he said to me. He says, "Besides us, nobody else knows what's going on around here." And from that point, I served on the borough council for 25 years. I was the borough president for 20 years.
Did you ever think that you'd have a life in politics?
No, not at that age. But you know, because of my interest in history and my interest in law, I always liked small town. I always liked government. I always liked the way government, you know, worked, whether it was in Washington or Harrisburg, or even more importantly, on the local level. You know, people should realize that getting involved in the local level is really important in your community. You know, giving your time to the planning commissions, the zoning hearing boards, being elected to these positions. These are the most impactful positions you can have, particularly on your neighbors' lives, because you know you're affecting things. You know, whether it's, and it may sound silly and trivial, but you know, garbage pickup. You know, when are you paving the streets? You know, how come the roads weren't plowed? You know, those are the things that affect people every single day. The stuff in Washington and Harrisburg, that's all good stuff to read about and see, but it's so far removed from us, does it really affect us every day?
Exactly.
You know, here, Pike County is a really safe place to live. It's a beautiful place to live. There's outdoor life. There's, you know, many people are working, you know, many people have insurance, many people are just living a good life, you know. But there's people like the veterans. There's people, you know, particularly in my mind, people with disabilities, you know, people that are born with mental disabilities or even intellectual disabilities. They need us to step up and speak for them because they can't speak for themselves, and that's what our job is here. You know,
we're going to come back around to what you guys are doing here in the county, things that are important. But something that I don't know, a lot of people know that you wrote some books about the area, correct?
I did. So being my historian, and again back to connecting with all of the people in this community working locally, I wrote 5 different photographic history books. I've written one called Matamoros to Shohola, which kind of tells the story through pictures of Milford, and just what the title says, from Matamoros to Shohola. And it's all old pictures with, you know, showing you maybe what the community looked like at one time, so that we can enjoy it and make sure that we, you know, we don't destroy what we have. See what it is that we have and think about the future and how we can protect things. The other ones I've done, my wife's family happens to be from Port Jervis, New York. I took a real liking to Port Jervis, New York. Port Jervis, though, and I wrote 2 books on Port Jervis. Port Jervis, though, is really a good connection to Pike County. When we think about how Pike County was developed, it was developed east to west. The first big settlement here was Port Jervis, New York. The railroad is what drove the development here in Milford. You know, the D&H Canal going through Port Jervis was really instrumental in this entire region. I wrote a book on Dingman's Ferry, showing all the, you know, what was there prior to Tox Island, and told the whole story of what was down there. So and then I wrote a book on the D&H Canal, which was really a little bit, you know, more than just this region. D&H Canal tells the story from Scranton all the way to Kingston. But as I say, Pike County and even Wayne County and Port Jervis, they were all developed because of the D&H Canal. Without the D&H Canal, there's not much here.
Drove a lot.
It drove, Industrial Revolution was driven by the D&H Canal.
The products and everything, right?
Yep.
On the canal. Where can we get your books?
Oh, you can get my books in all the local stores here. I have them, you know, but they're all available. They're available online. You know, it's a lot of fun to do that, because I think when you do that, of course, a lot of people call me now thinking I know the answer to all the historical questions. I don't, but I have all the resources to do that. You know, I really give a lot of credit to people like George Floor. You know, I mean, George Floor was the county historian, and what George wrote is immense, and it tells the entire story of the region. Before him, there was a gentleman by the name of Norman Leedy from Milford Borough, again, who wrote prolific amounts of paper and was able to help me put together the things I told my stories with.
Matt, let's talk a little bit about economic development here in Pike County. I understand, number one, that population continues to grow here. Why is that?
So the population, we are the fastest growing county in the state of Pennsylvania, and it's 6.2%. And when you look at that nationwide, we're pretty high up there in the nation also. I think the reason people are moving here, and they are mainly people that are either near retirement or retired. And the way we see this is the school populations are not increasing. So if they're not increasing, that means that mom and dad, husband and wives are moving here, selling their houses in New York and New Jersey and moving to Pennsylvania.
So what's drawing them to this county from those areas? Because they're leaving some things behind when they come here.
They are. They're leaving, and I think they realize it when they get here, in some cases, unfortunately. But I think they're coming here for economic reasons. They're coming here. Pennsylvania has no income tax on retirement.
Okay.
So that's a big deal. Real estate taxes, as much as we who live here sometimes think our real estate taxes are too high, but when you talk to the people coming from these other areas, they're saying, you know, you don't know what we're facing in places in Long Island or places in Westchester or Orange County, New York. And when you look at those demographics, that's where they're moving from.
So their dollar is stretching further, you think, being out here?
They are, and they're selling houses down there. While our housing market seems to be booming and prices are going up, the prices in those regions are even higher. So, you know, in the cases of people retiring, they're selling a big house that they've had where they raised their family. They're getting a large amount of money for it. They're coming here and buying something a little smaller and then having some money that they can put in the bank to live on for the rest of their lives. So, you know, it's all of those combinations. It's also a beautiful place to live. Let's not give that up, right? You know, you want to go hunting, you want to go fishing, you want to just go hiking. It's right here in your backyard, right? You don't have to go very far.
Now, you talk about the older population coming here to Pike County. Now, the one thing that they really need, and we all know this as we get older, and that is you need more doctors. You know, you just, because you find yourself having to go for this and that and whatever. The issue you have up here is doctors and hospitals and things like that, and how is that being addressed? We know that there has been work going on, but where are we at right now?
So there's been a lot of work going on that, and back to my thought earlier that the county developed east to west. That's a really important component of this, because whenever you bring this up, that we don't have a hospital, we don't have any urgent cares, we have limited amount of doctors, the first thing people say is, oh, it's somebody's fault. It's really no one's fault. It's just the way the county developed. In this region of Pike County, I'll just give you an idea. In 1980, the largest populated municipality in Pike County was Matamoros.
Right.
So that's
that close to Port Jervis.
That close to Port Jervis, and then you add in Milford, Westfall, and these regions. We were the hub of the population center, and that's where the hospital was. There was a hospital in Port Jervis since 1854. There still is one. But what happened? COVID drove this even further to make us think about it. It came very obvious that we need to have better medical here. Now, during that time, many of our surrounding counties, Monroe, Wayne, all came to our aid. They didn't just say no. They just came here and put up some clinics. But at the same time, me and Ron, and prior to that, prior to Chris Harris, it was Tony Waldron, we realized that, we need to start thinking about this. Yeah. And me and Ron really put a big push on as far as thinking about how do we get medical here. We visited every single medical provider you can think of in the region, and biggest the answer was no.
Right.
But what happened here was
not that easy, is it?
No. Northwell, which is a New York-based facility, out of the largest employer in the state of New York, the fifth largest medical in the nation, their executives summer here. I think they were here and they had a medical issue. They realized that there was no medical here. They came in this room, in this building, and they met with me and Ron and Tony at that time and said, we're going to help you fix this.
Nice.
It was. Now, it's been a long road because these things take lots of time. There's a lot of regulations. They got to get staffing. They have to, insurance.
And they're coming from another state, too. It's not like a in-state hospital network.
So right now, we have two urgent cares. The one in Dingman's, down by the new Weiss Market in Delaware Township, is ready to open. It is fully built out. If you stuck your head in there, it's like everything's in there.
So what are we waiting on with that?
Waiting on they're just finishing up on their staffing, their doctors, and just finalizing to make sure that all the insurance is in place. Because the last thing we want them to do, and they want to do, is open up and have one person go in there that say, we don't take that insurance. It's going to just be, it's just going to be a black eye. The other one up by Lake Wallenpaupack is completely under roof. It's under construction. They're working on the inside. That's probably another year and a half out. So, these things are taking a long time, but they're here. Now, the thing that they've brought to us now is that they're very interested with a partnership with Lehigh Valley to bring in a hospital here. Now, when I say a hospital, I mean a mini hospital. There's one being built, I think, is it in Tannersville or Barton, where it's just these mini hospitals.
They're like neighborhood hospitals, they call them.
10 beds for emergency care, 10 beds for overnight care. But they have they have MRIs, they have CAT scans, they have blood work, all of these things that we need in our neighborhood. Because that's the issue in Pike County. Nothing is relatively close, and hopefully when that comes, that will draw more doctors. Because that's our other problem. We have people going to the doctor now, particularly in senior transportation. We're driving people all the way to Scranton. So the stress that you can put on your transportation department, just taking care of people in need again, of senior citizens, is very, very time consuming and costs a lot of money. Whereas if we had these services closer, we could provide more services maybe for other reasons. So the hospital and the medical, that's number one. We speak about this every single week. The three of us sit here and we have calls with the medical providers, and we're pushing them. We need to have them here. If there's single one thing I do before I get out of here, is to make sure that we have expanded medical.
So Matt, what are some of the key industries that are driving the economy here in Pike County?
Well, the number one industry in Pike County is tourism. Has been forever.
You say that, and the one thing I want to bring up about that is, tourism is big, but you used to have some major hotels, which you don't have these days. You don't have the Tamament, you don't have the Pokemont, you don't have the Unity House. Those aren't here. Woodlock is obviously still here.
The one resort we have is Woodlock. It's the largest employer
It's a big one.
in the county,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And then all of the other, Milford Hospitality, Settlers Hospitality, run all these restaurants, and they have rooms and they have hotels.
Right.
But, the draw here is the second homeowner still. Still a lot of people that come here on vacation because of all of the great outdoor space we have.
Yeah.
So, that is the big tourist, that is the big industry here.
Yeah, it is.
And, we are, that is our industry. We try our best to maybe diversify into others. Medical will certainly help that, right? If we can get more medical here, there are really good jobs and there's really good services we could have. When it comes to other types of industries, besides a place like Econopack, which is out here on the edge of town, which is a food repackaging firm, one of the largest in the nation, there's not many other big industries in the community. Part of that also drives is the fact that we lack a lot of infrastructure. What I mean by infrastructure is water, sewer, and gas. The only section of Pike County that has central sewage goes from the edge of Matamoros, not even into Matamoros, to the Walmart. When you come in here into Milford Borough, there is no central sewage. That limits the amount of development that you can truly have.
Do you see that ever changing?
Right now, that is really an initiative by the municipalities. The county doesn't drive that. We help them with it.
Right.
We help them with some funding to do their 537 plans and their studies. And now, just recently, just yesterday in fact, they're filing for grants through the federal government, Milford Borough, Westfall, and Matamoros Borough to expand the facility, which is at Hunt's Landing. That's the only sewage plant, public sewage plant in the county. No place else. There's some other ones within some private communities. So that can help maybe drive a little bit more economic development of other types of businesses along the 209-6 corridor between Milford and Matamoros, and drive a little bit of more industry and bring in more tax dollars.
And that was my next question. Without these extra types of industries in the county, you guys have a tough balancing act, I think, with the budget, right? I mean, it would be great if you had some more industry and more money to work with.
Yep, and it is a balance. It comes to our environment also, right? There's the whole thing of where do we allow, and it really is up to, again, to the townships, but they need the revenue also. The county needs the revenue, and the one thing we need to look for is new revenue, because the only other way to get revenue is to either cut services. That's not always a good thing to do. Or raise taxes, and sometimes you don't have any choice. But if we can all work together to find new customers, and that's basically what that would be. New buildings, maybe the redevelopment of properties, the expansions of buildings, which would drive in more tax dollars to us without using so many services. So it's a balancing act. When you go to commercial development, they don't put kids in school when you build some type of, like an Econopack or whatever. There's no children going from there into school, but they pay school taxes. Right. So that helps offset some of the costs for the residents who are sending kids there. So it is, we work closely with the municipalities. They, in Pennsylvania, we don't govern zoning. Zoning is all left to the municipal leaders, and in my mind, that's where it should be. I'm not saying that the county should do it or the state. I don't think that's a bad idea. It's best if it stays local, but we need to respect that. And I think in many cases, people don't want to see change. That's another. It's true. That's a hard thing to. I don't like to. At times, none of us want to see change, right? We like things to be the way they were when we were a kid. We want to always see this open space, or we want to always see this farm, but. Sometimes that's not reality. Reality is some areas need to be developed. Yeah. Some areas need to be protected. There absolutely are regions in this county that are environmentally need to be protected for the water or just for the landscape and for the aesthetic value of the community.
Pike County, very northeast corner of Pennsylvania. How do you think Harrisburg views Pike County?
I think I'm not going to cry like with some type of, stepchild or whatever. I think we get lost a little bit, but not completely. That's our job here in the county, is to make sure that our voice is heard in Harrisburg and, for that matter, in Washington. The one thing I don't think Harrisburg understands with Pike County, and I believe this is true, I will say this for any other county along the northern corridor, we are very much impacted by New York City and by New York and New Jersey. Our wages here are driven by that because we are a commuter community. Still 50-some% of the community every day leaves Pike County to go to work someplace else. And a majority of those people are heading into the New York and New Jersey markets as far into Manhattan. those are much higher wage areas, and we all know cost of living is higher, but they generate more income. So when we look for employees here in Pike County, like correctional officers, we had to raise our price of our wages of our correctional officers a number of years ago to like $26 per hour. But the reason we had to do that, we had nobody coming through the door.
Yeah, you have to compete, right?
We were competing with Otisville, which is right across the river here, and which is both a federal and a state facility.
Wow.
We can't meet their benefit packages, but we can try to work closer to get to the wage package. It is certainly a better, I'm not a correctional officer, but I would think that it's probably easier to work in the Pike County Correctional Facility than the Otisville Federal Penitentiary. Children and youth caseworkers are the same thing. You know, we raised them last year. This all generates back to, you know, why at times we have to raise taxes.
Do you ever see Pike County changing, or would you like it to stay the way it is?
I want it to stay the way it is. I want to make sure that we preserve the borough the way it is. You know, back to my time in the borough, I'm the guy that put through the architectural review board because I thought it was that important. You know, people were up in arms. You know, you're worried about, you know, you're going to tell me what color to paint my building. What am I going to do to my building? You know, you're taking away my rights. See, I twist that the other way around, and I say, yeah, I'm not really taking away your rights. I'm protecting your rights from the guy next door who could do something really detrimental to the value. And you see that in the borough now, the values of having the Tom Quick and all of these historical buildings being preserved the way they are really matters to the community. But I think it also matters in a larger part to the entire county. Yeah. You know, everybody, because Milford is the county seat, people consider it to be their town. Right. You know, we get west of the county. It's very rural. When we get west of Milford, I should say, right. It's very rural, and I don't see that changing. You know, 33% of the county is owned by either the state or the federal government for state game lands. Okay. I don't see that changing.
Yeah. Matt, want to thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate the time.
Yep, absolutely.